Welcome to today's Global Connections program. I'm Bill Miller. What are some of the major issues confronting basically every Latin American country, especially some of the ones in Central America, in the areas of climate change, business development, economic development, education, and health, and many others? We'll be back in just a moment to talk about these and other important issues. Latin America is a very vibrant and important area of the world. There are many exciting activities taking place in that part of the world, but as always, there are some challenges too. Today, we're going to take a look at Latin America in general terms and talk about what one business operation is doing to help provide assistance to several of the countries in that region. My guest today is an expert on both of these issues. My guest today is Mildred Espinoza. Mildred Espinoza is the CEO and president of Empowering Business Latin America. She is an honorary ambassador of tourism for Guatemala. Ms. Espinoza spent 15 years in broadcast media in the United States and is a two-time Emmy Award-winning television executive and journalist. She was named Newswoman of the Week by CNN and Espanol. Mildred Espinoza, welcome to today's Global Connections program.
Thank you so much, Bill. I'm really excited to be here, and thank you for the invitation.
I appreciate you being with me today. We're going to talk about what you're doing to provide assistance. Let's talk a little bit about Latin America. Now, we're talking about, what, 40-some countries, I guess?
Absolutely.
If you include the Caribbean and everything.
We do.
So it's a large number. But in general, what is the prevailing situation with some of the Latin American countries? You're based in Guatemala City, Guatemala. What are some of the major challenges that you're looking at right now?
Well, in fact, why I decided actually to be in Guatemala after so many years of living my time in the U.S. and starting Empowering Business Latin America was strictly to focus on developing opportunities, on social and economic development opportunities. That is something that's so needed in Latin America. As you know, developing countries have a lot of challenges, especially when we talk about sustainable development goals, education, poverty, gender equality, health, and everything else related to the 17 SDGs that we have now as mandated by the UN. There are a lot of challenges, economic growth certainly being one of them. I am focused and headquartered now in Guatemala, and with the focus of creating opportunities that are in line with sustainable and economic development solutions that can help some of the issues that impact Latin America.
Exactly. Now, so often we read articles, unfortunately, so often with the U.S. media, if it doesn't bleed, it doesn't lead, and if it bleeds, it leads, but they go for the sensationalist stuff. But how is the climate in certain areas, for example, El Salvador, one of the most densely populated countries in Latin America, Central America? You hear about the gangs in Honduras and different places like that. Well, what is the social situation, social condition? Are those stories accurate? Are they overblown? Or what is the prevailing situation now?
Well, I'll tell you this much. It's and you and I both know, we both come from the media background. There's a happy medium there. There is a security issue, of course, throughout not just Central America, really. It's something that's challenging in all of Latin America. Yet, I do think that, unfortunately, the media does play a major role in how it actually promotes its stories and its focus. It doesn't mean that, one of the issues I've had always in focusing in stories that are so negative with the countries is that they really make it out to be that it's the entire country, instead of really discussing more of regions within those countries that have those issues, which of course they are. There's poverty. When there's poverty, there's violence. When there's violence, then you do have all sorts of other issues that result from that. Yet it's not the entire countries. And I think at the same time, there are other things that affect that. And of course, when we talk about not having the opportunities that we have as we know it in the U.S., of course, that affects those countries. And that's what results in some of these violence. Are those issues permanent in some of these countries? Absolutely. But it's not the entire countries. It's more in regions of those countries.
Now, you're the founder, CEO, and president of Empowering Business Latin America. What exactly is this Empowering Business Latin America? We know it was founded just recently. What is your main mission?
Well, our focus, as I mentioned, our focus strictly to find opportunities either by being creative with products, technology, initiatives that are focused on creating best practices in the country. And I'll give you an example. EBLA actually focuses right now, and we focus under the framework of the SDGs. Our focus is to help by building as private sector the opportunities that will help the country then build through initiatives that are focused on alleviating poverty. In this case, we have taken the initiative of developing, which we just implemented some pilot projects on housing. Why, as you and I know it, there's a huge deficit in housing, not just in Guatemala, but throughout all of Latin America. Over 59 million people live in inadequate housing. In Guatemala, we decided to create a best practice that we will have the opportunity to replicate in other countries. And so what we did is we're bringing new technology into the country, innovative technology and alternative construction system, working in partnership with the U.S. International Green Structures, to have the opportunity then to introduce into the country an alternative system that will be a lot faster to build with, that will be more accessible to low income, to the bottom of the pyramid. To the base of the pyramid, we need to have to allow them to have access to housing. This we know will then have the opportunity to develop jobs, because we are then creating economic growth for the country by creating jobs in the construction, in the services sectors. And we just did actually the launching of this opportunity, of this initiative with affordable housing, with this alternative construction system on World Habitat Month. We wanted to have the opportunity to feature, and we came together in partnership with the United States Embassy in Guatemala, with the U.S. Ambassador Todd Robinson, as well as some of the local private sector, to involve in really making a point of why it's important to adopt new technologies and new systems in countries, not to necessarily ignore what's currently working there, traditional construction, but the more opportunities we have to bring into all of these countries, alternative technology that can facilitate jobs, that can do skills transfer, it will definitely have the opportunity to build and create economic growth for these countries.
And our viewers can go to your website, www.eblatam.com, and get more information about your various projects. Now, when you talk about housing, that's very critical. It's very, very important. With the new Sustainable Development Goals, which we'll be talking about in a few minutes, I believe housing is included in that, or habitat, I should say. And of course, today, a lot of the experts say that decent housing is a human right. Years ago, perhaps it wasn't viewed that way, but today it is, because people have a right to live in a decent house, not live in a cardboard shack or corrugated steel, whatever the case might be. But let's talk a little bit about the housing. Are we talking about a different type of housing? Are we talking about modular units? Are you talking about prefab housing? Or what are some of these specific types of housing arrangements are being constructed? I know you're not constructing them, but you're involved with people who are.
Well, believe it or not, I am constructing.
Oh, you are? I stand corrected.
Well, as you know, I'm hands-on.
Get your hammers and nails.
Yes,
Right.
absolutely. Well, reality is this is prefab housing, but it is the IGS actually has technology in the United States that is this is a type of a mill. It's called compressed agricultural fiber. It's a mill that you process a board. The type of board is using raw material. In this case, it's wheat straw. And wheat straw, then it's processed, and it's actually covered with a membrane of kraft lining paper. And once it's actually processed at 200 degrees at 16,000 pounds of compression, then what results in this is a panel that's 4 by 8, 4 by 8 feet, 2 1/4 thickness. That's good enough to actually build. It's as hard as concrete once it's actually produced. And these panels are environmental, they're sustainable, they're a lot faster to build with. The structure is a galvanized steel structure. And so and I can tell you, in Guatemala, we just finished our pilot projects. We built a 37 square meter home. Bill, I was so impressed. Record timing. We did it in a week, actually in 3 days. And a week to be finished completely with exterior finishes. These are homes that when people actually walked in there, and we had various types of people who actually had the opportunity to see the exhibit, they were so impressed because it looked like any type of housing that you would actually construct with traditional construction materials. We did in the rural areas, which is really where we want to do the impact, because that's where you have most of the deficit in most of these countries in Latin America. The opportunities need to actually come to these people where they normally don't. We built a community center, 55 square meter solar community center, so that we could also introduce the opportunity to use natural resources in the location. And we did this in 4 days. So clearly, and how many people? 10 people. And that was because we wanted to include the community, to be a part of it, to do the capacity building with transfer of skills, and allow them to learn about using new tools to have the opportunity to build a home, and for them to actually even become the ones who build their own communities. Our goal is to actually begin to develop sustainable communities and integrate the people themselves so that they have an opportunity to own it and be a part of that change. Our slogan at Empowering Business Latin America is we're catalysts for change and transformation. And that's really what we're looking to promote and replicate throughout all of Central America.
And you were talking about how these homes are sustainable, they're lower cost, let's say. And of course, Guatemala is in an area, part of that ring of fire where they have quite a few earthquakes from time to time. Are they earthquake-proof also? Earthquake-proof also?
Yes, they are. Okay. In fact, in the U.S., and that's really that's why we pretty much did the analysis and really looking for the right technology for the country. It is seismic resistant. It actually has gone through different types of analysis throughout the United States. In fact, how IGS actually started was, if you remember, in the U.S. we had Hurricane Sandy. The original reason for them to actually even be created was so that they could begin to develop for disaster emergency relief. They did produce some things for FEMA in the U.S. And so we know that then this type of building, this belongs in emerging countries. This is technology that would be more accessible and will definitely help solve an issue that's so critical throughout all developing countries. And this is something that we're doing because it does have all these added values and benefits of the materials in the country.
Well, you're watching Global Connections Television, which is an independently produced program. The opinions expressed on Global Connections are solely those of the moderator and his guest. We would invite our viewers to go to our website at www.globalconnectionstelevision.com to view previous programs. Also, if you have suggestions for future topics and future guests, please let us know. Today we're taking a look at Latin American countries, and in particular Guatemala, and some of the activities that are underway to help promote decent habitat in that area and also development and business opportunities. My guest today is an expert on both of these issues. My guest today is Mildred Espinoza. Ms. Espinoza is the CEO, President of Empowering Business Latin America. Mildred, we're talking about housing in particular. Now, are you operating just in Guatemala, or are you in other countries, Panama, El Salvador, Nicaragua, various countries in Central America, or even in South America? Are you expanding into those areas?
Eventually we will.
Eventually.
But we needed to first start the initiative and really structure ourselves living in one of these countries. And so we chose Guatemala, certainly because Guatemala, 35% of the country's GDP, its focus actually for the entire Central America out of Guatemala. And so it was really the opportunity for us to really insert ourselves and bridge that gap and begin to create that best practice. As you know, when it comes to developing pilot projects or doing a transfer of technology, you should really focus first in one country, a specific issue. And that's really what we did. Eventually, we know that once we have everything established and that the technology is, which we will transfer by 2017, our goal is to do the actual transfer of the technology to the country, then we will begin to replicate the business opportunity throughout all of Central and South America.
And this transfer of technology, we hear about that. That's fascinating because anytime we're talking about climate change issues or whatever, we're always talking about transferring technology. How will that be done? To whom will it be we, or with whom will you work on that, and how will you actually do that?
Well, in this case, it's actually with our U.S. partners. At the same time, I do have in my company, obviously, other private sector investors. In this case, it will be in partnership with IGS, and because this is their technology, they will actually we will be developing an IGS in Guatemala, an International Green Structures plant in Guatemala, so that we have the opportunity with them and their experience to actually transfer the technology itself. They will be building the mill in the U.S. and we'll be transferring so that we can commission the technology to have it in country. This will allow us then, as you can even imagine, this gives us the opportunity to begin a plant in country that we will be producing now, no longer importing from the U.S., but we will be producing and exporting to Central America from Guatemala. At the same time, what makes this so exciting to social impact is because because it is wheat straw, what we will be using as the raw material for our panels, we then will be impacting and adding value to the agricultural industry, which, as you know, within the SDGs, it is SDG 2 when we talk about nutrition, food, really in improving and helping the agriculture industry. We will be doing that just by creating a plant in country. Over a year's time, while we produce full-time calf panel in country, will be impacting at least over 3,000 farmers in country.
And I'm glad you mentioned Sustainable Development Goals, which were adopted in September, I guess it was, this year by the United Nations General Assembly, the 193 countries, and they build upon the Millennium Development Goals that ran from 2000 to 2015. These are broader than what the millenniums were, obviously, and they include everybody. Everybody's included, all the countries of the world, all 7.3 billion people, and of course they're working over the next 15 years to eliminate poverty. As you mentioned, goal number 2, dealing with hunger, with food, stability, security, that type of thing. Number 5 is to empower women and promote gender equity. How important is that to involve women into what you're doing, not just in the housing area, but across the board? Doesn't matter if it's agriculture, small businesses, whatever the case might be. How important is that to help women to get the skills and to help them get started in a variety of things, be it a small business, micro business, or whatever the case might be?
It's vital. There's a Chinese proverb that says that half of the sky is held up by women, half of the sky is held up by men. And so we, of course, want to be able to work with both. And our goal is certainly, again, our company as private sector, we are focused on social business, and we are working under the framework of the SDGs. About 8 of them are implemented into our country, into our company. And part of it is empowering women. Gender equality it's vital, especially in these countries where education opportunities, it's really something that it's needed, especially for the sector for women. So we're looking in developing opportunities where we have the opportunity to either partner with different NGOs that are already working in country on improving and strengthening education for women, opportunities, whether it's in micro business, starting their own small business. In fact, we're going through an exercise right now with financial institutions where we are going to be developing the opportunity for these women to become, especially for those at the base of the pyramid, first-time home buyers. It's beyond the house. It really goes beyond the walls. The idea behind this is that sociologically, if you think about it, really the environment, a house, knowing that you can afford to have something new, it will change the way you feel, the way you think, the way you do things. You will change, forever change what your families are doing, and you will serve as an example to your children. In our countries, where, especially developing countries, there is such a need for women to lead, and there really are fascinating women out there who are great leaders. I think they many times go unnoticed, but who work very closely with many of the small communities in the countries and who are just simply looking for opportunities. And so our goal is to develop those opportunities, create jobs locally, and to have them be a part of their communities and the uplifting of the country.
Now, climate change is one of those issues in the Sustainable Development Goals, and many experts believe that's their #1 challenge around the world. how do you factor the whole climate change discussion into what you're doing? And how has climate change, I know you're not, perhaps maybe you are an expert in climate change, but how is Guatemala being affected? It seems that every country on the planet, everybody with whom I've spoken or read about, is being adversely affected in some way, shape, or form by the changing weather patterns. You mentioned Hurricane Sandy, which some people attribute to change in our climate, that type of thing. But how is Guatemala being affected, and how do you factor climate change into your overall planning and implementation?
Well, it's vital, and absolutely, we do live in vulnerable countries. Central America, it's a very vulnerable region of the world. We often are hit with earthquakes. Guatemala, since 2012, has been strongly hit with different earthquakes. In fact, that was frankly one of the reasons why I decided to move back to the country and look for alternative opportunities that could create more of an opportunity for these countries to have alternative technologies that could help. In 2012, we had an earthquake that hit the northern part of the country where there were many dead. Months prior to that, it had already happened and there were other casualties. We were just on October 1st of this year with a mudslide, and that's due to a lot of rain that's not traditional for this time of the year. And so Guatemala, with whether it's floods, whether it's earthquakes, rain, it's certainly impacted, and the entire region, unfortunately, it's vulnerable. We take that into consideration. In fact, when we talk about the products that we're bringing, just as with this initiative that we've started, it's environmental. Our goal is for folks not to, wheat straw normally and traditionally it's burned in most countries. In this case, we're then preventing that from happening. So we're reducing gas emissions. So we are protecting the environment, because at the end of the day, climate change, there is a relationship there between how we treat our world, how we treat the earth, how we treat where we live. And so in some way, in some shape or form, we're contributing to that. And in this case, we would be contributing by just using our natural resources as part of our raw material.
Mm-hmm. And you mentioned about Sustainable Development Goals. I think you mentioned that you're focusing on 8 of the 17. I'm sure the others are of importance to you also. But that's the thing. It's the interesting thing about the Sustainable Development Goals, that it covers the water. They cover the waterfront. Organizations, be it your organization, non-governmental organizations, groups like Rotary International, Alliance International, Kiwanis, faith-based groups, they can all focus on the Sustainable Development Goals that they want to work on over the next 15 years, and I'm sure that they will do that. But as you mentioned, they're all intertwined, and that is so absolutely critical to keep that in mind. Are you doing anything with any of the United Nations agencies? You're talking about housing. The agency that comes to mind is Habitat, unhabitat.org. That's human settlements, and of course they're interested in housing and that type of thing, mostly in urban areas. But are you working with groups like Habitat? Do you use any of their materials, or do you deal with other UN agencies?
We are actually, we certainly, and we do have we just did World Habitat, we commemorated World Habitat Day as private sector. Frankly, in Guatemala, it was the first time that it was done by and led by private sector. Usually it's done by NGOs, and that was as a result of certainly speaking and having a relationship here with UN Habitat, and in sharing with them our goals and what we're hoping to achieve. Locally, we're doing it by working also with Habitat for Humanity, with the local chapters, and working with other organizations, other institutions that are focusing strictly on housing, on low-income housing. And so we do look for those partnerships. I firmly believe that in order for us to really work in pushing forward and making things happen in relationship to the SDGs, we really need to be doers. We need to go beyond the papers and what we write and what we see and what we read. And in order for that to happen, we need to be able to execute. We work in partnerships. I think that when you really strategically look for those partnerships that are in line with your objectives, you can really do wonderful things. And these are partnerships with private investors, with private sector, which I think are vital in order for these SDGs to be not just something that we see and hopefully see the results 15 years from now, we're hoping that we can actually make an impact within the next 5 years. We don't want to wait for 10 or 15 years to happen. We want to do it now. I think things need to happen, and as we move forward, within the next 5 years. And so, bottom line, private sector, both private and non-governmental agencies need to work together.
Exactly. And that is the bottom line. You've hit it on the head. That's exactly what we need to focus upon. And we can learn from one another. There are best practices ideas out there. You have some. You can learn from other people. People can learn from you. But the problems we're dealing with, we have to deal with them as a community. That's the community of the world, because we're not going to be able to overcome these problems individually or any one country or any one region, especially climate change. That is our number one challenge. But Mildred Espinoza, you're doing some remarkable work, and I want to thank you so very much for a very interesting and a very informative program.
Thank you so much, Bill. It was a pleasure being here, and thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you. I'm Bill Miller. Thank you for joining us today on Global Connections Television.